This man was wrongfully accused of a deadly clapping and now has only 3 hours to prove his innocence. So, we start off with this woman getting out of a car and walking into a building where she's being watched via the security cameras. She then goes and knocks at this door, and a man comes to open and invites her in. On the news is the funeral of an artist and photographer named Laura Vidal. The rumor is that she was clapped by her lover, Adrian Doria, who, as usual, claims innocence. Now, let me introduce you to these two people. This man is Adrian Doria, while the lady is his lawyer, Virginia Goodman, hired by Felix to help Adrian get out of this. At least, that's who she claims she is. Now sitting down, Virginia gets out her timer and asks Adrian what he and the victim were doing at the hotel. Then his mind goes back to that exact day. It's a snowy day. He says he found out someone who had found out about his affair was blackmailing them, asking for 100,000 euros. Not wanting to be caught, they followed his directions. So she moves on from that and asks him about the message he received on his phone. He says they had been waiting a couple hours when the message popped in. It's a message from Laura's number. The guy has her phone. The message reads, "I'll tell you everything, room 715, Hotel Bella Vista." Laura thinks it's a trap, but Adrian says they're going. He goes to inspect the money, carries the briefcase, puts on his coat, and before he even steps foot outside, he's attacked from behind and knocked out cold. He says he was unconscious for 2 minutes, and when he woke up, the first thing he heard was knocking on the door. It's the police. Concerned neighbors had called. But just as he's going to get the door, he notices a little figurine on the floor, and he goes to examine it. He looks a little further and sees Laura lying lifeless on the bathroom floor, with the money scattered all around. At this point, the cops have asked the manager to open the door. She does, but the safety chain is in place, so they break in. The cops now enter the room and find Adrian holding Laura and crying. He's trying to explain to them that he didn't do anything, but they just cuff him and take him away. Back to the present, Adrian is now crying. Virginia tells him that, according to police reports, witnesses heard the cries from the room, but they didn't see anyone leave the room. Plus, the safety chain doesn't help Adrian's case at all. Who fastened it? To worsen the case for him, it was winter, and during winter, the hotel usually takes the handles off the windows, so they could not have been opened from the inside. Basically, no one could have escaped without leaving traces, and they looked for those traces and found none. It's not looking good for Adrian. He insists he was set up, but that's looking difficult to prove. He says the police formulated the theory that he erased Laura to save his marriage after he unsuccessfully tried to buy her silence. Who's doing this? He doesn't know, but he's suffering. He was cuffed and taken into custody, and his wife took their daughter and left him. By the way, the cops took him away in a chopper. I personally wouldn't mind getting arrested if it means I get to fly in a chopper. Virginia now gets up and tells him that, in her 30-year career, she has had to deal with two kinds of clients, the ones who cooperate and the ones who expect her to get them off the hook without getting their hands dirty. And it's obvious what category she thinks Adrian belongs to. She now goes over to him and shows him a newspaper headline which talks about the disappearance of a man named Daniel Garrido and asks him if he has ever wondered if the new prosecution witness has anything to do with this. So she asks him again if he knows who clapped Laura. He shakes his head. She now tells him if he wants to know, and if he wants to get out of this mess, he should never lie to her again. My man looks pretty shaken right now. He has been humbled. He starts talking. This time he starts from the very beginning. 3 months ago when he was in Paris for a business meeting. At least that's what he told his wife. Let's now go to Paris. He answers a call from his wife, Sonia, and tells her he's coming home. Meanwhile, Laura is right there rolling on his bed. Later, they hit the road. Laura is taking pictures of the landscape while Adrian is driving, and it appears that Adrian doesn't know the first thing about having an affair, because why did he let Laura take pictures of them together? And I'm not encouraging infidelity here. I'm just encouraging having common sense, feel me? Anyway, as they're driving, they get to a forked road, and Adrian goes left even though the GPS says right. He says left is faster. While they're driving, they get into an emotional conversation, and while they're lost in that, a car starts approaching from nowhere, a deer comes out of nowhere, and boom! An accident out of nowhere. Oh dear, these deers, how dare they? But Adrian manages to get the car under control, and he and Laura are okay. They get down to go check on the person in the other car. He's dead. Adrian tries to call the police, but Laura stops him. She says it wasn't their fault. He says it was, but Laura convinces him to consider his daughter and his career, so he reconsiders, and they head back to the car, leaving the dude's car door wide open. They get in their car ready to zoom off, but it refuses to start. To make matters worse, they hear someone coming. Laura quickly gets out of the car and tells Adrian to come down. She has a plan. She goes to the other car, turns it off, puts the guy's head down so you can't see him through the window, takes a notepad and pen, and returns to meet a confused Adrian just before the car gets into eyesight. The car approaches, slows down, and the guy asks them if they need any help. Laura just tells him that she swerved and hit Adrian, and now they're exchanging information. While they're there, the phone from the other car now starts ringing, so Laura just lies that it's probably the insurance company. By the way, that's a very loud ringtone. How can they hear it from all the way? Anyway, she cuts the call but acts like she's talking to someone over the phone. The Good Samaritan then says goodbye to Adrian, drives up, and says goodbye to Laura. Now that they have a witness, they have to get rid of the body, so they carry his body and put it in the trunk. Laura says it's best if she stays here to ask for help, and he goes to get rid of the body. Adrian now gets in the victim's car and drives off. On his way, he's thinking how, if he wasn't with Laura, if he didn't take the left turn, if he was with his wife and daughter, he'd not have been in this mess. In case you haven't figured it out by now, this guy whose body he's going to dispose of is the same guy from the newspaper which Virginia showed him earlier. So, Virginia now asks him what he did with the car, and we see him sinking the car with the guy in it. While he's doing that, he notices a deer watching. I'm sure it's that same deer that caused the accident coming to make sure that the job is finished. Anyway, Adrian focuses on the job he has to do, and he makes sure to watch until the car goes completely underwater. He says that, while he was there, Laura's words kept ringing in his head that since they couldn't help the lad, they had to help themselves. He doesn't have a future, they do. He explains that after the job was done, he called Laura from a prepaid phone and told her where he was and she came to pick him up. We now see what has been going on Laura all this while. She made a phone call and asked for a tow truck, then she chilled there, waiting for it. Instead of a tow truck though, another Good Samaritan arrives and offers to help her. This man, his name is Thomas, says he's an engineer and he detects the problem and tells her that he can help her tow it to his house and have it fixed there. She agrees. Laura and Tomas get talking in the car. She tells him she owns a bookshop and she loves reading, especially about theater. Tomas says he met his wife in a theater group. Take a mental note of this. He now asks for her name and of course she lies. She says her name is Raquel. A call now comes in for her. It's her husband who's asking her when she'll be boarding. She tells him she'll be late. He offers to come get her and she says no. They now get to Tomas's house. He introduces Laura to his wife, Elvira, who notices blood on Laura's wrist. Laura just quickly covers up saying it was the deer's. They now invite her in and Thomas gets to fixing the car. She quickly goes to the bathroom to wash off the blood and breathe. She comes out and goes through the man's books, pictures, and artworks while he fixes the car outside. In the process of fixing the car, Thomas notices a lighter. Take a mental note of this. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the movie is just about to get spicier. At this point, Laura and Elvira are having a conversation, and Elvira mentions her son Daniel, who should be home any time now. She now shows Laura a picture of Daniel, and yes, it's exactly what you're thinking. That lad they just clapped is this woman's son. While Laura is looking at the photo and trembling, Elvira is answering a call from Daniel's girlfriend Clara, who's saying that she's with Daniel's friends, but he's not there. She says he came back from work, changed and left, so now he should be with his friends. Tomas now comes in and hands Laura the keys. He's done fixing the car. He tries to get her to stay for dinner, but she's most definitely not staying in this state. While she's still trying to leave the house, she hears Elvira say she wants to call Daniel. Laura remembers she's with Daniel's phone, but she's not able to turn it off in time, so it rings out. The parents hear it ring, so they follow the sound. As they're approaching where she is, Laura just immediately hides the phone in one of the chairs, so it looks like Daniel just didn't go out with his phone. They come there, call the phone again, and Thomas finds the phone where Laura hid it. They buy her lies. Laura now says she has to go. Thomas accompanies her outside and watches as she adjusts the seat. That adjustment makes him suspect that the car is actually not hers. His wife joins him outside and he just holds her. Now, back to Laura and Adrian. Laura tells him he has to dispose of his car. The following day, they take it to a scrapyard together and they go their separate ways. He gets back to town and reports his car stolen, pretending to be returning from Paris. He then calls his wife and tells her that he'll spend the night at the apartment in the city. Guilt was eating him up at this point, but he had to get up and go to work tomorrow. If not, it'd have looked suspicious. He had been working on a project for a year, and this was the day he was to close it. He definitely couldn't miss it. After work, he returned home, and when it looked like he was in the clear, the bubble burst. Daniel's disappearance had now become a hot topic in the news, and a search party had been sent out for him. Back to the present, and Virginia gets a call. She's told that the prosecution's new witness has arrived in court, so she has to hurry him up. She turns to Adrian and gives him the news, but they don't yet know who the witness is. He immediately puts a call through to Felix and gives him the news. Felix now asks to talk to Virginia, who tells him that Adrian might be compelled to testify tonight. He now says that he's onto a big break that might be beneficial for the case, and he'll call back later because the call is breaking up now. Virginia now turns to Adrian and tells him that everything is under control, so they return to the story. One day, he's at the office when the police pay him a visit. They show him pictures and question him about Laura and the accident and ask if he knows her. They even have a sketch of her from Tomas, but Felix jumps into his client's defense and says, how would Adrian know what happened in Bierge when he was in Paris that weekend? The officer says that Laura told Elvira that she hit a deer, but they found remains of a second vehicle, which makes them think something happened, and she covered it up with the help of a partner. Also, the car she drove had a license plate registered to Adrian, but then he had already reported the car stolen, so that checks out. But the officer asks him for a parking ticket, which can prove that the car was in the place he claimed it was stolen from, but Adrian says he lost it. Very convenient, isn't it? Felix and Adrian are now alone, and Felix tells Adrian to be honest with him and asks him if he had anything to do with the disappearance of the boy. He goes on to tell him the truth and then asks Felix to buy him an alibi. Felix tells him that the next time he calls, he better start by telling him everything. Adrian now asks him to help him take care of the police report because he doesn't want this to hurt him in the future. Felix says he'll take care of everything, and he does, but only in part. As Virginia reveals to him right now, Adrian's name was found in the police archives by one of her sources, and the prosecution also has it. She now asks him what he did when the police told him to identify Laura. We now cut to him at a phone booth at the port, placing a call to Laura and asking her how she managed to convince the police that Daniel ran away. The port is not the smartest place to make this call considering there are cameras everywhere, but Adrian confesses that he was too nervous to think about all of that. One day, while at the port, he saw on the news that the police had ruled out Daniel being in an accident, and the theory now is that he ran away with 50k euros from the bank where he worked. He immediately knew that that was Laura's doing, and that's why he made that call. She asks them to meet. Of course, Adrian shows up ASAP. Laura now explains that she took Daniel's wallet before putting him in the trunk, and it ended up being very useful. Using her husband's computer, she hacked into Daniel's account and stole money using his identity. Laura believes she has covered her tracks, and she tells Adrian not to try and jeopardize any of this because she has pictures that proves that he was not in Paris that weekend. Mic drop. As Laura drives off, Adrian sees a man staring at him from across the road, but he disappears in a second. That man, by the way, is the first Good Samaritan from the night of the accident. Anyway, in the following days, Adrian goes on to be awarded Entrepreneur of the Year, and that came with a lot of media attention. Then in one of those work events, a reporter asks to speak with Adrian. He goes to meet the man, and it's actually not a reporter, it's Tomas. He says that his wife figured that Daniel used his phone until shortly before he picked Laura up that day, so the only explanation is that Laura brought it to the house with her. He also added that he noticed Laura adjusting her seat when she entered the car, so he figured she wasn't the one driving the car before she showed up. So, she had an accomplice. He now tells Adrian that people don't just lie, so she either lied to protect herself or to protect Adrian. Tomas now takes out a cigarette and asks Adrian for a lighter, and he brings out that lighter that was in the car the other night. That's exactly what he wanted to see. So, when Adrian lied and said he was in Paris that week, he was only making matters worse. Tomas says that's what the police said. And even though a flight ticket and hotel reservation doesn't prove anything, he and his wife decided to go back home. But when the news started accusing Daniel of being a thief, they knew for sure that it was all a hoax. Their Daniel? A thief? Never. No way. Elvira broke down on hearing that, but Thomas kept fighting. He followed the only path he had and figured that Adrian and Laura were having an affair, and Adrian was trying to protect this from reaching his family. He says he gathered evidence and took it to the police, but they didn't believe him, and that was when he realized the amount of power Adrian had. But he had gone through the worst as a father, so fear was no longer an option. So he got to work and found the facts. That woman's name is actually not Raquel. Adrian was in that car with her, and they had an accident which involved Daniel. Tomas now tells Adrian that the lighter gave him away. He asks Adrian if he was the one who got rid of the body. He says he and Elvira know that their boy is gone. They just want to find his body and give him a befitting burial. At this point, security comes to get Tomas out of the building. He's begging Adrian to speak up, but he just stays quiet. After that point, Tomas felt like he had hit a dead end, so he just went back and focused on taking care of his wife. Back to the present. From all Virginia has heard, she deduces that Laura's demise is a direct consequence of Daniel's death. But the police are concerned only about Laura's because that's the only body they have, and Adrian is the chief suspect. She now tells him that there's someone whom he has not named that knows more about Daniel than even his parents. Adrian now mentions the Good Samaritan from that night. He says it could be him who blackmailed him and Laura and put them together in that room that night. Virginia says the jury will only believe this if the details make it plausible, so Adrian tries to cook up a plausible story, starting from how the appointment at the hotel was arranged. He received a package which had Daniel's name on the envelope. Inside the envelope was a picture of the river where Adrian sank the car and an audio recording of a man telling him he knows what he and his girlfriend did with Daniel, and the price for his silence is 100k euros in small unmarked bills. He says if he doesn't get the money today, that picture would go to the police. He then tells them to be at the Bierge railway station at 5 p.m. He'll call the phone booth there and tell them where to deliver the money. After hearing that, Virginia tells him that there's a hole in his story. She asks him how he can explain that the passerby driver knew about the swamp. Adrian says the sound he heard just before the car sank may not have been just the deer. Maybe the Good Samaritan doubted their story in the first place and went to hide in the bush to see how things would play out. Virginia is definitely not buying it, so she says she'll ask him 3 questions, and if he can answer just one, they'll continue with his theory. The question's exactly as she asks him. 1. What is the sense of the incriminating message that you received on your cell phone? 2. Why did the murderer not take the money if that was his purpose? 3. How could he get in and out of the room as if he were a ghost? Of course, he can't answer any, and she tells him that this is exactly what the prosecutor wants. She tells him to come back with a better theory. So back again we go to the railway station. The call comes in at 5, and Laura goes to answer it. With a warped voice, the person on the other end tells her he'll be waiting in room 715 at the Hotel Bella Vista. He also tells her to leave her phone in the trash there and take the train to the hotel. At the hotel, there's a reservation in Adrian's name, so Laura goes to get the key and goes up. She's asked to fill a form first though. She gets up and signals to Adrian to join her. We can't see anyone in the room, but it looks like they're being watched. That's when Adrian gets a text from her number. And you remember what happens from here. The reason you're seeing Tomas as the culprit here is simply because that's Adrian's new theory. Tomas has motive after all. Virginia now says for him to implicate Thomas in the murder of Laura, he has to admit that he had something to do with Daniel's passing. Anyway, Virginia keeps going on about some law stuff, and then she says that everything has to be analyzed from a different perspective. She says what if the answer to the enigma was never inside the room? She mentions that Tomas set a trap for him. He knew the area and chose an isolated hotel. She even points Elvira out in a picture from the papers where Adrian was arrested. She says Tomas didn't know for sure that the body was thrown in a swamp. He just guessed, went with it, and waited for Tomas to go for it, and he did the way he focused on the lighter being thrown into the water. We now see Tomas go to retrieve Laura's phone after she dropped it, and how he made his way into the hotel room before them. We also see his accomplice, his wife, in the adjoining room, and how she cracked the window for him before he then went into the closet to hide. We now see it all play out with Tomas as the culprit. He did the crime and put Adrian's fingerprints on the weapon. And when concerned neighbors came knocking, he fastened the safety chain and then made his way out through the window to the next room. It wasn't an easy execution though. I know for sure I would have fallen. Anyway, while his wife was leading the cops to the room, Tomas was making his way out, far away from the crime scene. Elvira then goes to lock that window through which Tomas made his escape without being noticed. Virginia now gets a call. It's about the prosecution witness. They have just found out who the witness is, the first Good Samaritan. As far as Adrian is concerned, he's finished. But Virginia has a plan. She says they stick with his alibi that he was in Paris that weekend. After all, it was Laura who rented the cottage they stayed in, so it checks out. So, the plan now is to pin everything on Laura so it looks like Adrian was just another one of Laura's victims and he ended up in that hotel room because she asked for his help. In fact, he didn't even know anything about Daniel's disappearance the entire time. Adrian now points out the hole in this story: how to link Laura directly with Daniel's body. Virginia says to do that, they'd have to hide something that belongs to Laura in the boy's car, and his only crime would be aiding and abetting due to a guilty conscience. So she asks him where he sank the car, convincing him that they'll release the information anonymously and he won't have to admit to anything. Okay, but there's another problem. The new witness will place Adrian at the scene of the crime. She now reveals that the prosecution actually doesn't have any witness, and she just made that up with the information he gave her. He's surprised that she's been leading him on, and she then asks him why he didn't tell her the truth from the beginning. He says he was trying to see if it was possible to get rid of Thomas from the room. He had always known he was the culprit. It was easy to figure out that his wife worked at the hotel. He says he only waited for Virginia to figure it out herself so he could be sure that he can trust her. He then goes on to show her on the map where he sank the car. She now goes to the window and appears to look at someone from a building across, when a now relaxed Adrian says he has to tell her something else. Daniel actually wasn't dead. Before he pushed the car into the swamp, he heard banging from the trunk, but he thought Laura had already gone too far, so he went ahead with it anyway. Now, Virginia looks at Adrian and calls him a scum, almost breaking down. She taunts him a little, and he reacts angrily, and she tells him that that's exactly what the prosecution is looking for. She now tells him she won't let him stain her record and asks him if there are any loose ends in his story. She figures it's actually him who got the police to believe that Daniel stole money and disappeared, not Laura. So, everything he said Laura did, it was actually him who did it. And it weighed really heavily on Laura, so she went to tell the parents the truth. Then she crafted the blackmail plan from Elvira's hotel. Her plan was to give the parents the money, tell them where their son's body is, and surrender themselves to the police. Adrian didn't like that plan at all, so he clapped her. He tried to escape through the window, but he couldn't. He then thought of deleting the text he received from Laura, but he thought it'd be useful to develop a theory that could save him. He then created a crime scene that'd look incriminating for Tomas. Adrian tried to plug holes in Virginia's deductions, but it's airtight. She then tells him to come with him and look through the window across from them. He sees Thomas watching. She says he has been watching for some time now. She now tells him that when Tomas and Elvira arrived at the hotel, they realized what had happened, and seeing as they couldn't trust the justice system, they decided to study Adrian and wait for the right time to strike. Tomas got that apartment opposite his and has been monitoring every meeting, every conversation, and every move. She says she noticed Tomas in front of her office one of those days and had him followed. She continues to push Adrian until he confesses that he clapped Laura. She now leaves the room and he turns on his phone. He calls Felix, who had left a message for him earlier. Felix tells him he has found the first Good Samaritan and he was actually the prosecution's witness, but he won't be talking because he has paid him off. Adrian then tells Felix that he told Virginia everything. Then while they're on the phone, they hear a high-pitched noise and the pen in Adrian's pocket seems to burst or something. At this point, Virginia is walking briskly and Adrian is figuring out that he has just been played. That pen she gave him to mark the spot where he sank the car was actually a wire which had recorded their entire conversation. She turned off his phone earlier so the signal wouldn't disrupt the recording. We now see Virginia go to meet Tomas, hand him the marked map, and hug him. He has every single thing he needs now. From the window, Adrian now watches as Elvira takes off her disguise. Remember, they met at a theater group. As Tomas picks up his phone to call the cops with all the evidence he has now gathered, the real Virginia Goodman arrives at Adrian's door. Checkmate. Moral of the story? That's crazy.